Hi, I'm Dr. Selena Fisk, and welcome to this episode of Make Data Talk. In this podcast, I help you turn your spreadsheets into stories in a way that is practical, accessible, and hopefully a whole lot more useful than your grade 9 maths textbook. Today, let's talk about being in a helicopter versus walking down the street. This is an analogy that I use a lot to describe the different levels of data that we use and rely on. Sometimes we're up in the helicopter looking down, and sometimes we're down on the street walking along, patting dogs and looking at homes. Do you know which space you play in the most and when you need to change from one to the other? So this analogy, I think it kind of speaks for itself, really. If I was to visit you in your hometown and I had loads of cash to splash around and I wanted to jump in a helicopter on a really sunny, beautiful day, I could fly above the area that you live in. And that would give me a really good understanding of, are you close to the coast? Are there mountains? Are there forests? How residential is the place that you live compared to, is there commercial areas? Is there farming? Would I be able to see kind of the main parts of either the CBD or downtown, and I could see the main streets with the most people in it? And then I could potentially fly over areas that are less populated and more quiet. And that's a really beautiful perspective potentially for us to take. I think about all of the times I get to fly into towns during the middle of the day, and I get to kind of get such a beautiful view of what it might be like to live there, and I guess what the town or city is like. And that's a really valid and useful perspective to gain because, when you fly into different airports, for example, when you're flying over different towns, it looks different and there's a different feel, and you can immediately start to understand what it might be like to be there and to live there and to work there and to kind of be on the ground day to day. So that summary version of a town or city is really useful, but then nothing beats walking down the street. And so I might be in a, small country town in regional Victoria in Australia or wherever I might be. And, the main street might only be about 1 kilometre long, or I could be in a bustling, CBD like Melbourne, for example, where there's just tens of thousands of people that I would walk past, in an hour, all going about their own day. And I can look at the individual restaurants, and I can see people walking their dogs, and I can look at the different homes, and I can look at hotels, and I can look at the different businesses, and I get a totally different understanding of what it would be like to be in that town or city and to live there. Now, both types of data and information are really useful. There are times where we need to be in the helicopter and we need to be thinking about that summary view. And there are times where we absolutely need to be walking down the street and think about what it actually means day to day for people, living there or working with that information. At times, we do need to zoom out and be in the helicopter. And when we're in the helicopter, we can start to think about some of those big kind of KPIs, key metrics, even magic metrics, if you like, that some of our organizations really hold their hat or hang their hat on. These are things like, some of the magic metrics that I talked about in the book, I'm Not a Numbers Person, are things like hotels often talk about, heads on beds or occupancy rates. Airlines, the trains, buses talk about on-time departure. There's still quite a few cancellations happening occasionally at the point of me recording this on flights across Australia. Those metrics around the number of cancellations matter. And they're those really big helicopter summary statistics that are useful as a key measure of how the organisation or a team is going. But often those things are not manageable or workable in our day-to-day. So when we're in the helicopter view, I can't necessarily immediately do something about that particular thing to change it. So take, for example, in a hotel, the heads on beds or the occupancy rate. That's really important to know. If a hotel is 90% occupied or it's only 45% occupied, I absolutely need to know that, say, as the manager of that hotel. But I can't magically change that metric no matter how much I try. I actually need to go into the walking down the street data, which is where I start to think about the other metrics that are going to feed into and I guess are pieces of that bigger picture that will hopefully then lead to increase in occupancy rates down the track. So I think about some of the factors that might be contributing to occupancy could be things like marketing, for example. Do people know what you offer? Are there good photos online? Are you advertising? Are you reaching the people and the market that you would actually want to be getting into your hotel to begin with? What's the customer service experience like when people come to your hotel? What's the experience that they get at the front desk? What are they saying on Google reviews? What's your rating out of 5? Like, what's actually happening day to day on the ground in that hotel? Because we know that if people are having a good experience, they're likely to tell people about it, and if they're having a bad experience, they're also likely to tell people about it. So we want that customer service and the interaction to be as positive as possible. Another factor that could be contributing is the food and beverage service. So what is that service like? What are the offers available? Have people had really good experiences with the food and beverage provider in the hotel? Are they getting good room service? Are they happy with the quality of the food? How are they reporting that information back to you and back to, the people they work with and people in their communities? And then finally, and it's probably not finally, there's a whole lot of other examples, but I'll also include housekeeping. So if people are showing up in these hotel rooms and they're arriving and they're not satisfied with how clean it is, or on the flip side, maybe they're blown away by the quality and the fittings and just how clean the entire property is. Those different experiences are absolutely going to influence whether or not people come back and whether or not they tell their friends and colleagues about it. All of those contributing factors play a part in getting more heads on beds. So if you think about being in a helicopter and thinking about that occupancy rate, if I want to improve it, that's useful for me to track at a helicopter level. But day to day, I can't actually drag people off the street and get them to put their heads on beds and pay a night's accommodation. But what I can do is I can work with on the walking down the street data is I can work with food and beverage if we know that the reviews of them and the feedback you're getting from customers is not great. We can work with housekeeping if people are not happy with that. We can work with the front desk. We can think about our marketing and advertising and what's happening and how much reach we get and how many people are accessing the website and all of that. So it's actually all of those pieces of the puzzle that, for me, if I was working in that hotel day to day, I actually have some control over those day-to-day walking down the street metrics. I don't, when I'm showing up at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning to start work, I don't have direct control over the number of people who are going to put their head on a pillow that night in that hotel. But I can do something about how I treat the people who walk into the hotel. And then hopefully, if we have these little 1% improvements in all of these different areas, and we're tracking those and we're monitoring those smaller pieces of data at the street level, then that will accumulate up to greater number of people actually booking nights in the hotel and showing up. So there are times where we absolutely need to play in that helicopter view in the summary statistic, and all of those summary statistics that we use are always going to be influenced by a whole stack of different metrics that sit underneath it that probably cover a range of different components and aspects of your business or organisation or team. But on a day-to-day basis and when we're working with others, we actually need to go down to those small pieces of data that we can actually move the needle on every day with the vision that we're actually moving the needle on the big picture over time. So day-to-day, we need to play in the walking down the street, and then we need to be able to zoom back out into the helicopter. And we also need to be able to talk to our team about that. Our team have got to understand that they can't directly influence those big summary statistics, but they can do those smaller bits day in, day out that are absolutely going to lead to improvements down the track. So thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Make Data Talk this week. It's really nice when I go and speak to people and they often, this is probably one of those things that gets quoted back to me the most, the helicopter view versus walking down the street. I hope the analogy has resonated for you, but it's just really important to think about working between those two spaces. Are you confident zooming out and going back up into helicopter? But equally, we've got to be really comfortable walking down the street and thinking about what can we do day to day to make change. As always, take care and look after yourself.